Hi, everyone. I made a video the other day about neurobiology memory reconsolidation as it relates to constellations. Um, I realized afterwards that I probably confused people with the term of target learning. And I am not formally trained in coherence therapy, and this is not really a talk on coherence therapy, but I do want to show the book Unlocking the Emotional Brain. Um, it's well worth a read. Sorry, it doesn't come out well with the share screen here, but there it is. And if you read this, you'll see a lot of examples. The examples are really worth looking at. Um, Here's a website. And to repeat what I had said before, or what the authors say, the combination is the reactivation of the target learning and also at the same time something that contradicts it really clearly, and they're both very alive. And then the brain basically erases the old emotional learning. So the formula is simple, but the target learning may be complicated, and it can take weeks or months or even longer of therapy to find the intelligence behind the symptoms and all the different places where the beliefs and learnings are showing up in somebody's life. It's called coherence therapy because once you understand these things underneath it, you realize that it totally makes sense. It's coherent. And I'll explain a little bit briefly here. So I had mentioned this in the previous talk. Reactivation is reactivation of the implicitly learned material. This is usually outside of conscious awareness. That's why it's implicit. It's not the presenting symptom, which is why we need help finding them. Somebody comes in and says, I'm depressed. That's a symptom. What it is that led to the depression, or what are the feelings and beliefs underneath it? I'll never get anything I want. I have no right to exist. Whatever, those kinds of things are closer to the implicit learning. And a lot of times we need help finding them. And there's lots of different ways, different processes to access those. As I mentioned, a lot of different therapeutic modalities, and they give a lot of examples in this book of all these different therapies that access it in their own ways. So I'll say for the third time, I'd suggest people read the case histories in the book, but I do want to just read a couple examples of these implicit learnings, something that inside somebody had its own logic from when they were young. So here's one about somebody who basically really didn't stand up for himself at work, even though the person was very competent and also very smart. And it's like, well, there's something up behind that. And as they explored it, it came out to something like this. If I say anything with confidence, I'll be just like dad, a know-it-all, lording it over everyone. That's what his dad used to do. And then people will hate me for that, just like I hate him for it. So I better keep myself quiet by telling myself, what do I know? Even though that makes me feel so insecure that I do express what I do know. That would be an example of the implicit learning. Better to just, tell myself I don't know anything than end up like that. Here's another one. It was a woman who basically loved her husband, but didn't feel any desire for him or really anybody else. And as she explored this, that was a presenting symptom. What it turned out was, I hate to admit it, but experiencing sexual pleasure with my husband makes me more like my mother. Her mother did some really inappropriate things in relation to her when she was younger. So even though it's hurting my marriage, I'll continue to avoid sexual contact because it's better to sacrifice pleasure and intimacy than to risk doing to my daughter what my mother did to me. Perfect logic, under the radar operating. Here's one more about somebody who kept people away for years with his anger after his daughter died from a medical condition, and he blamed himself for not picking it up in time. As he explored this, I'm worthless if I make mistakes, and all of you have already seen me make an unforgivable one. If you see me make another one, you'll see me as totally inadequate, and I can't risk that. With my anger, I got to keep you far enough away from me forever so you'll never see me make another mistake. Another unconscious thing operating to protect him from being completely, isolated. Makes sense from that perspective, and those things are what could be called these implicit beliefs or target learnings. So it's holding those things in some form, and the obvious experience, oh, people don't reject me. Actually, I'm not going to be rejected if if people see me this. Oh, I'm actually not so incompetent. Whatever Some other people who do this work, a shout out to Sarah Peyton, who is the one who's sponsoring the Resonance Summit. Besides her resonant language and her constellations, she does this in the form of looking for unconscious contracts, which are vows that were made to protect one's belonging or becoming or protect somebody. These kinds of vows. I'll never This is part of her practitioner training, part of her therapeutic work, and her book, her second book, which is called Your Resonant Self Workbook, is all about unconscious vows and has examples of it in addiction, shame, etc. It's nicely done. Another way of doing this, I did some trainings with Thomas Hubl, a spiritual teacher. When in a lot of his one-on-one work, he'll actually use his subtle capacities, his sensitivities, to sense into where the problem began in the other person. And then he may start to presence this, have the person check, and sometimes then like, oh my God, I feel this in you when you were about 4, maybe. And then the two of them are facing it, holding it together, being with it, and also being with a different experience. And a lot of times this also has an unlocking type of experience. It's another way to access this. And I just want to offer a few examples from constellations that are different from in the previous talk. Someone may present with, I just can't seem to be successful. I don't know what's happening in business. But as they lay out the constellation, you start to see that perhaps something happened where the relatives were never successful. And you see in the constellation, the representative or the client saying, I will not be more successful than any of my relatives in order to belong, to not make them feel shame, in order to stay loyal to them. And so I do this out of my love. Or you might see, I won't be successful because 3 generations back, my great-great-grandfather owned a plantation and completely exploited the South American people, and I am being loyal to the victims out of my love. All completely under the radar, unconscious. But when these things get revealed, then they can also, something else can show up that can then positively disconfirm them. Another kind of explicit learning you can see in constellations is seeing that somebody's is being loyal to an excluded one. Like somebody with a drinking problem, when you set it up, it might be, I'm actually drinking out of loyalty to Uncle Rich, who was an alcoholic and was excluded from the family system, and my drinking is a way to honor this or to stay connected. Completely unconscious. The person may not even have known that Uncle Rich was an alcoholic, but his family soul has an effect. And one more, which is somebody, for example, a parent who is suicidal, barely able to function, and the person realizes very young that if they have too many needs or demands, it's going to throw their parent over the top. They don't remember any of this years later. You set up the constellation and you start to see this, and the child says, or, I'm going to shut myself down. I'm not going to ask for anything. I'm going to decrease my life force so that I won't be too much trouble for you, dear parent. Yes, I want you to live. Better that I die than you do. Sad and tragic, profound love. Anyway, these are some of the kinds of implicit learnings that people carry and some of the different ways to surface them. There are many more. There is a lot of great stuff, a lot of great processes in the world these days. Thank you again.